All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. So thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Benjamin and Elise Wall and the Tiny Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shir Midrashos this month in honor of Moshe Abramson and Jeremy Lassen, for making the Shiurim available to all of those outside of our physical base measures. To thank Jack Bennett for dedicating the Shiurim and Midrashos this month in memory of Sergeant Nikolai Rappaport of the Givati Brigade, who died in a Hezbollah ambush in southern Lebanon in February of 1998. To thank Jerry and Sarah Wolaski for dedicating all the Shiurim and Midrashos this month in the Schus for Refuah Shalema for Zechariah Dov Ben Perel Shira. We thank our Day of Learning sponsors, Baruch Batsofin, in the merit of the Refuah Shalema of his father, Eliezer Ben Dvora, who was undergoing surgery in Eretz Yisrael, literally at the time of the death. However, just a moment about this. A number of you may remember Baruch Batsofin and his wife Atarat lived here in America. They're actually neighbors of ours on Wallace Avenue a number of years ago. Baruch was here for a medical residency, and he was a real stalwart member of the DAF. Baruch's father is having his digestive tract reconstructed today. He has not eaten he's not been able to eat food for 21 months. It's a significantly complex surgery to redo everything to enable him to resume just a normal course of life. So Baruch WhatsApped me and he asked me, because literally the surgery is happening now during the DAF, and he asked me if all of us, the members of the Shir, could take on a small Kabbalah in the schus of his father. And even just today, to have a little extra kavanah when we make brachos. Sometimes we take the opportunity, to have a cup of coffee or to eat breakfast, and it's normal for us. It doesn't. And so often, even if I'm making a shahakol before my coffee or I'm making a bracha before I eat, often the bracha is, garbled and gobbled just as quickly as the food. And to recognize that the ability to consume food and drink in a normal fashion is nothing short of miraculous. All it takes is, think about 21 months, all it takes is a couple of minutes where you can't perform that activity of daily living to recognize what an incredible miracle it is. So Baruch asked me if I could ask the Chevra, and I include myself in this, just even for today, tomorrow, for however long we feel we could take on that Kabbalah, to be able to make our brachas with a little extra kavanah, just to be a bit more attentive. And in that, Zichos Emir Hashem, we hope that the surgery of Eliezer Ben Dvora will be successful. He'll be Zocha Emir Hashem to a lifetime of making brachas b'kavana. And Halavai Emir Hashem, this small Kabbalah for us shouldn't only make a difference for the Chola, but Emir Hashem should make a difference in our lives as well. All right, Tabo say, I'm sorry? His name is Eliezer Ben Dvora. Eliezer Ben Dvora. All right, Tabo, so with that, let us always, one of the beautiful things about the shir that we have is even people who are no longer here. That sounds very ominous. Even people who don't live here anymore, right? And have. So Baruch Hashem, once you're part of the Chevra, you feel part of the Chevra on an ongoing basis. It's really incredible thing. We're a family, and as such, we have an obligation to be able to look out for each other and to look after one another and to do for each other whenever we can. All right, so with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. A beautiful, magnificent daf ahead of us. Today's daf is daf Gimel. We are picking up on Beis Amud Beis 2b, and we are picking up V'i Bayis Ema, which is 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom. So, if you remember again, we were focusing on a very simple question in yesterday's daf, which is the use of the lashon of derech. Our Mishnah introduced us, Ha'isha niknis bishlosha drachim. A woman can be acquired for marriage in 3 different ways. So we were trying to figure out, and we were discussing, why is it that we're using the lashon of derech as opposed to the lashon of davar? Why not say Ha'isha niknis bishlosha dvarim? Again, we're speaking about shalosh versus shlosh. Okay, so now the Gemara is giving another answer. Excuse me. The other possibility is as follows. The other possibility is The other possibility is, why does the Torah use the lashon of derech as opposed to davar? Well, isn't that beautiful? This is Hamari Rabbi Shimon. Reflexively, Rabbi Shimon. The sign Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon said as follows: Bipnei ma amra Torah ki yikach ish isha velo kasav kisi lakach isha liish. Good question. Why does the Torah, when it frames marriage, why does it say when a man will take a woman? Ki yikach ish isha, and why not say when a woman will be taken by a man? Why does it phrase it like that? Both said it's absolutely beautiful. Mipnei shedarko shel ish lachzer al isha, ve'ein darko shel isha lachzer al ish. For it is the derech of a man to go ahead and literally lachzar. Lachzar can mean to follow after, to run after, to pursue. It is the derech of a man to pursue a woman, and it is not the derech of a woman to pursue a man. To pursue a man, I would say this is an incredible Gemara. Why is that? This could be compared to a person who lost an object. Mi chozer al mi. Who pursues who? Right? Balaveda mechazer alavedaso. The owner of the object pursues the lost object. Right? So you lose something. Who looks for who? So the owner of the object pursues the item he lost. We'll say, what's the nimshal? Remember, Chava was created from Adam, the Maharsha explains. Chava was created from Adam, right? She was taken from a rib of Adam Arishon, which means that woman comes from man, right? So there's a piece. So when a husband has a wife, when a husband's looking for a wife, he's looking for a piece of himself. He's looking for a piece of himself. So therefore, again, when a man goes out to get married, he's looking to become complete. There's a piece of me that's missing. Ultimately, again, therefore, who runs after who? Who pursues who? It is the person who lost the object who runs after, who pursues the object to find it. And therefore, again, the Torah, even when it frames marriage itself, uses lashon of ki yikach ish isha, when a man will take a woman, because a man is the one who pursues the woman is not the one who pursues the man, for the man is looking for something that is missing from him, that's been taken from him. What a beautiful, beautiful insight into marriage. And I will say, this is also a very important piece within Shalom Bayis. I will say, the achrayus, to create shalom within a marriage, the achrayus to create happiness within a marriage is on the man. It is not a shared partnership. Everyone has to do their part, but who takes the lead? Who takes the lead? It is the man, it is the husband who must take the lead to make sure that the marriage is harmonious, that the marriage is happy, that the home is good. I'll say, wow, it's not true, it's a partnership. It's not. Ki yikach ish isha. The Torah puts the responsibility of not just creating the marriage, but maintaining the marriage on the shoulders of the husband. And I will say, this is why even on an ongoing basis, Chevra, it is so important as a husband to set the right tone in marriage. Opening the car door for your wife, right, doesn't stop after Sheva Brachas, right? It is something that a husband has an achrayus to do every single time he's getting in a car with his wife. How does a husband not open a car door for his wife, right? Chivalry is not dead. Chivalry is not dead. It doesn't make a difference. She could open her own car door. She could do a lot of things on her own, right? That doesn't mean, let's say, do you know the difference that it makes in a marriage when a husband opens a car door? I know we spoke about Shabbos flowers. You know, I got good feedback from it. I have a couple of new husbands that we signed up for weekly Shabbos flowers, right? But Lamaisa, again, the little things within a marriage where a husband takes ownership to create an atmosphere of love, of warmth, of commitment, makes all of the difference within a relationship. Ki yikach ish isha. The Baal, the husband, is the one who is pursuing the wife in order to create a beautiful, loving, and harmonious marriage. Incredible. I will just share with you, I saw a ridiculous idea by the Rebbe, the Papa Rebbe, in the Sefer Amira Yafa. He's quoted as saying as follows. Also, get ready for this. He says, Yadua ki HaKadosh Baruch Hu nikra ish u'bnei Yisrael b'chinas ish. That's what we were speaking about yesterday, right? Remember again, we saw Tiferet Shlomo, Shlomo Adam's Ha'isha Niknis, Ha'isha's Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael, right? So again, along those same lines, the Rebbe Papa says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the man, Ish, and ultimately, again, Klal Yisrael is the Isha. The Rebbe will say, in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's a tension, right? What's the tension? So listen to what he says. This is incredible. He says, Ki Hashem Yisparach Omer, Shuva Elai, Va'ashuva Aleichem. We'll say, how timely is this? Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul. Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul. David Flum just sent me a picture. He said, nothing better than being in Eretz Yisrael. It's in Eretz Yisrael now. Right? Nothing better than being in Eretz Yisrael on Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul. It's true. As great as being in Eretz Yisrael on Rosh Chodesh Elul is being with this year on Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul. Baruch Hashem, right? This is a great schos as well. So there's a tension in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's the tension? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Shuva Elai, return to me, Va'ashuva Aleichem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you want the relationship, come back to me. What does Klal Yisrael say? It's the Pasuk Malachi. Klal Yisrael says, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha V'nashuva. Klal Yisrael says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you bring us back. You hear the tension? Kadosh Baruch Hu saying, Klal Yisrael, come back. Klal Yisrael saying, Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha V'nashuva, you bring us back. So God's telling us, no, make the first move. Make the first move, come back. Klal Yisrael saying to Kadosh Baruch Hu, no, make the first move, bring us back. So there's a tension. So says the Rabbi Papa, so who's right? Who's correct? So Rabbi said, listen to this. And comes along, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi says, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes along and says that ultimately, again, he says, Klal Yisrael is right. Klal Yisrael is right. What's the raya that Klal Yisrael is right? Kiddushin, Daf Beis Amud Beis, Darko Shel Ish Lachzor Ala Isha. It is the derech of the man to pursue the woman. It is the derech, the man, the ish in this case is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the derech of the man to pursue the isha, to pursue Klal Yisrael. V'lo darka shel isha lachzor al ish. And it is not the derech of the woman to pursue the man. Al kain, tzarech HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahaschil tchilo lekayim. Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'achar kach mekayim v'nashuva. Therefore says the Rebbe Baba so beautifully, Kadosh Baruch Hu, sorry, we win this one, right? Kiddushin Beis Amud Beis, Darko Shel Ish Lachzor Ala Isha. It is the derech of the man to pursue the woman. It is the derech of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe, you bring us back. Hashivenu Hashem Elecha. If you make the first move and you bring us back, V'nashuva. I promise, if you pursue us, ultimately, again, we will reciprocate. Incredible. Halavai. We should be Zochem. Meretz Hashem. Says, let's go back there. V'hadis nan. But that which we learned before, B'zayin Drachim, both Kirin and Zav, Shabbos say, going back to Zav, right? So remember yesterday's daf we saw, in 7 different ways we checked the Zav. So listening Dvarim, once again I will say, why Drachim? Why Drachim? Right? Why not Dvarim? So Hasam HaKamash Malon, the Darka, the Michlo Yisera Lasuili de Ziva. We'll say there, because remember, there the word Derech, it's also trying to teach us a different lesson, which is that the different things bring about different results. It is the Derech, it is the way of excessive eating to bring on Zivos. The Darka, the Mishnah Yisera Lasuili de Ziva. And ultimately, again, it is the way of excessive drinking, ultimately, again, to bring about Zivos. So that's why the Mishnah uses the lashon of Derech. Esrog, Shavali. These are very exciting Gemaras also because it's always exciting. It's always exciting when the Gemara brings in information that really has absolutely nothing to do with what it is that we're learning. Different topics that are being brought in, but remember, it's being brought in for a very specific reason of Derech versus Davar. So listen to this. Esrog, Shavali, Ilon, Begimel, Drachim. Right, the Mishnah says an esrog is comparable to a tree in 3 different ways. Before we get to this, look at Rashi. Begimel drachim. Rashi says arla urevai. Remember, an esrog is subject to the laws of arla, which means first 3 years you don't go ahead and consume the fruit. It also has revai, which is in year number 4 you could consume the fruit, but it has to be consumed in Yerushalayim. Right, bo ki'ilan ule'inyan shviyas holchem beperosav achar achanota ki'ilan v'lo achar lekita kerker. We'll say furthermore again for shmita purposes. So we determine whether or not something is shmita produce or not when the fruit blossoms. when the fruit blossoms. So I will say all of that is how trees operate. So just like trees, again, are subject to Arla, trees for fruits of the trees are subject to Revai, and fruits of the trees, their Shemitah status is determined by when the fruit blossoms. An esrog shares those three qualities as well. Okay, so the Gemara says, I don't understand, Lisni Dvarim, why Drachim? Again, I will say it's just a syntax question. Why drachim? Why say drachim? Why not say dvarim? Mishum dava'inon masni seifa uliyerek b'derech echad. Because we'll say, because you need the seifa. What does the end of the Mishnah say? A esrog is comparable to the fruits of the tree in three ways, but to vegetables in one way. In one way. So I'll say, by the way, before we get to this, what way is it compared to a vegetable? Look at Rashi. Uliyerek b'derech echad. Shebeshas likitaso isuro. We'll say, remember, we're going to, actually, this is a very important Rashi. We're going to see again that different tithes apply different years. So how do you determine which fruit belongs to which tithing year? So ultimately, again, vegetables are determined by the time in which they're picked. So depending on which year you harvest the vegetable, that determines its tithing year. In that respect, an esrog resembles a vegetable, as opposed to fruits of the tree, where their tithing year is determined just like their Shemitah status, by when they blossom. Vegetables are determined ultimately by when they're harvested, and in this respect, an esrog is like a vegetable. So its tithing year is determined by when it's harvested. Look at the rest of that Rashi. When it comes to determining its tithing year, we do not go after when it blossoms, kishar ilanos, like other fruits of the tree. Ella achar shana sheniklat bol kiyarek. The mafarish time really come on. So I will say, so it's actually very interesting. So therefore, we have the halacha now. So an esrog is like a fruit tree in three ways. Number one, again, in terms of its status of arla, in terms of its status of revai, and when it comes to Shemitah, its Shemitah status will be determined by when it blossoms. But in a fourth respect, or in one way, it resembles vegetables, in that the same way vegetables, their tithing year is determined by when they are harvested. Same thing with esrog as well, as opposed to fruits of the tree, whose tithing year is determined by when it blossoms. Now I will say Rashi happens to go on over here. This is actually a very important Rashi, which we've spoken out a number of times throughout the years. Rashi says, remember, there's a 7-year tithing cycle. Now, not really 7 years, really it's 6 years tithing cycle, right? Because year number 7 is Shemitah. So for 6 years, different tithes apply. So Rashi says over here, Shana Rishona Shel Shemitah, Ma'aser Rishon B'Sheni, V'chein B'Shniya. In years 1 and 2 of the Shemitah cycle, so which tithes apply? Ma'aser Rishon. Remember again, who gets Ma'aser Rishon? Who gets Ma'aser Rishon? Levi, right? Levi and Ma'aser Sheni. What happens to Ma'aser Sheni? You eat it, but you have to eat it in Yerushalayim. Aval Shlishis, what happens in year number 3? Ma'aser Rishon or Ma'aser Ani. In year number 3, we swap out Ma'aser Sheni, right? And instead you put in there Ma'aser Ani. So there again, and that's how the cycle repeats itself. Obviously, Truma, Truma applies all the time. Truma applies all the time. Good. So let's go back. So the Gemara says, we have to write derech because of the end of the Mishnah that says, Esrog is compared to a vegetable in one way. Seifa nami nisni davar. What kind of answer is that? So why don't you just say davar by the seifa also? In other words, just say davar the whole way. Just say, just say Esrog shava li'ilan begimel dvarim uliyerek bidavar echad. Just say davar. We'll say top of Gimel 3a. Hasam hakamash malan. So I'll say, listen to this. There, once again, I will say the use of the word derech is actually here to teach me an important lesson. What's the lesson? Hasam hakamash malan. The darke de esrog kiyerek. That the derech, an esrog, the derech of an esrog is like a vegetable. In other words, so we'll say the word derech over here is not just coming to talk about things or manners in which they are halachically similar, but it's coming to talk about the very qualities of an esrog. That the derech, the way in which an esrog grows, is very much like a vegetable. How so? Ma yerek darko ligodl al kol mayim ubishas likitaso isuro. Just like a vegetable grows through all water. What does it mean al kol mayim? A vegetable can either grow either through rainwater or through irrigation. Right? It could subsist on either of those, right? And ultimately again, the tithing year of a vegetable is determined by when it's harvested. Af esrog darko ligadol al kol mayim ubeshas nikitaso isura. So too an esrog is able to be sustained both through irrigation as well as through rainwater. And ultimately, again, at the time that it's harvested, that's when its tithing status is established. Therefore, what the Gemara essentially answers is, we need the word derech, because derech, what you begin to see over here is the word davar could just refer to different halachic categories. And therefore, again, if you're just talking about categories or just different halachic mechanisms, einachinami, you could use the word davar. The word derech is often used when you want to convey something a little bit deeper. Let's say in the case of zav, you want to talk about the causes of zivos. It is the derech of excessive eating, the derech of excessive drinking to cause zivos. Or again, in the case of esrog, you want to talk about the qualities of an esrog. That the derech of an esrog is very much like vegetables. And that again, it can be subsist like this. So you see the word derech used for these more nuanced halachas as opposed to davar, which just means again halachic categories. Interesting. Let's say I was thinking about this idea that what's unique, apparently the Gemara is highlighting over here, the uniqueness of the esrog is the ability that it can be sustained both through rainwater and through irrigation. So if you think about this on a little bit of a deeper level, we know that the dalid minim, right, the different species we use on sukkahs correspond to a lot of different things, but one of the things that, one of the symbolisms is that they correspond to different parts of the body. And the concept that Chazal tell us that esrog is domeh l'leiv, right? The esrog is compared to the heart. And I would say in that context, the heart is supposed to be is the center of one's spiritual activity. So it's interesting to note that the esrog itself is sustained both through rainwater and irrigation. So I would say, what's there in rainwater and irrigation? So rainwater comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? It comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Irrigation, you got to roll up your sleeves and make it happen. I would say, in the heart of man, there are two forms of inspiration. In Chassidus, there's the concept of his olusa de la'ela, his olusa de la'tasa. Literally, again, inspiration from above, inspiration from below. Or stated otherwise, Rabbi Yitzchak Abedishev explains, stated otherwise, what it means is sometimes in life, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends me a wave of inspiration. We have moments like this where I just feel inspired. I don't even know why I feel inspired, but I just feel inspired. I feel spiritually on fire. I feel spiritually awake. Where did that come from? What did I do? Often I didn't do anything. It's not me. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's Isarusa de la'ela, inspiration from above. But a lot of times in life, that doesn't happen. And a lot of times in life, you have to self-inspire. And you have to make it rain, so to speak, right? You have to create the inspiration. So I'll say, so life is this incredible synthesis between these two. There are those moments of inspiration from above, which when they happen are the most spectacular things in the world, but you can't sit around waiting for that. You have to self-inspire. And this is so incredibly important because we go through life, often we're waiting to be inspired. Right? I'm looking for inspirational people. I'm waiting to be inspired. Don't wait to be inspired, self-inspire. And I must say that's the symbolism with the esrog. The esrog is the lave. The esrog itself subsists on rainwater, inspiration from above, and irrigation, inspiration from below. If at the end of the day you want to lead an inspired life, if you want your lave to be fully nourished, if you want your esrog, so to speak, to be on fire, relish those moments where HaKadosh Baruch Hu inspires you, but make sure that you are digging those channels of spiritual irrigation. Make sure that you are self-inspiring as well at every moment possible. That shutfus, that combination of the two, that partnership of the two, is what makes a healthy lave, what makes a healthy esrog. Incredible. Let's go back there. Says the Gemara, Bahadisnan, kai. So we'll say, these are great cases. A kai. Now we'll say, what's a kai? A kai is an animal. Now, what's interesting about a kai, we'll say, in the animal kingdom, we have two different categories. We have chayas and animus. Right? So we'll say, so generally translated, a chaya is a non-domesticated animal versus a behema, which is a domesticated animal. So for example, just a simple example, deer, right, is a chaya versus a cow, which is a behema. That's a simple distinction. You have an animal called a kai. So we'll say kai, there's actually a lot of discussion about what type of animal a kai actually is. Kai was an animal in halacha where, again, we weren't sure which category it fit into. So, for example, this nan, kai yesh bo drachim shavel chaya. There are ways in which it is similar to a chaya. And Rashi says over here, a chaya requires kisui hadam, which is when you go ahead and you shech the animal, you have to cover the blood. Interestingly enough, the mitzvah of kisui hadam only applies to chayas, not behemoths. Not behemoths. So in certain respects, a kai is like a chaya, in that it needs kisei adam. And there are other ways in which it is similar to a behema. I will say in which way Rashi points out over here. Behema, the chaylev, the fat is aser. By a chaya, the chaylev is not aser. So I will say, see, this is interesting. So a kai, on one hand, is like a chaya, and that it needs kisei adam. Right? In other ways, it's like a behema, and that it's chaylev. So I will say, essentially what we're doing is, because we don't know which category a kai fits into, what we do, we give it the chumras of both. We give it the chumras of both. That's what we're doing over here. Furthermore, there are other ways in which a kai resembles both a chaya and a behema. How is that? Rashi points out over here, shchita. A chaya needs shchita, a behema needs shchita, and therefore a kai needs shchita. Okay? And I will say there are ways in which it is neither similar to a chaya or a behema. We'll say, what way is that? You cannot breed a kai with a chaya with a behema. Right? Why? Because since we're not sure about what its designation is, breeding it with either a chaya or a behema could be an issue of crossbreeding. So Moshe, see what's happening over here? So there are ways in which a kai is like a chaya, i.e. again, kisei adam. Ways in which a kai is like a behema, i.e. its chaylev is aser. Ways in which a kai is like a chaya and a behema, needs shchita. And ways in which a kai is neither like a behema nor like a chaya, i.e. you can't breed it with either one. Okay. Why are you bringing this? Fascinating. Why are you bringing this down? Lisni dvarim. Once again, why are you using the lashon of derech? Why not use the lashon of davar? Dvarim visu hadistan. I will say furthermore another example. Zu achas min adrachim sheshavu gitin ashel mishchirei avadim. Little blast in the past over here. So, right, this is one of the ways in which a document of emancipation is similar to a get. And I will say, Rashi is pointing out over here that Allah, if you bring, just like if you bring a get from Medina Sayyam, you have to say, from overseas, you have to say, b'fanei nechtav, b'fanei nechtam. So too, if you go ahead and you bring a document of emancipation from overseas as well, you also have to say b'fanei nechtav or b'fanei nechtam. So once again, I will say same question over and over and over. Why are you using lashon of drachim? Why not use lashon of dvarim? Ella. So we'll see. Here we go. Here's the principle. Ella kol heicha deika plukta tani drachim, v'kol heicha deleka plukta tani dvarim. So I will say this is actually a very interesting distinction. So I want to suggest over like this: any time that we need to make a distinction amongst items, we use the lashon of drachim. Anytime there's just a grouping with no distinction, we use the lashon of dvarim. Fascinating. So when you have a group, right? When you have a group, but there's a distinction, either within that group or within another group, ultimately drachim, derech, when it's just kind of like a harmonious, homogeneous group, ultimately again, dvarim. Okay, Daikanami Diktani. So we'll say if you take a look, actually we'll see the distinctions here in just a moment. Look at Rashi just a moment. Dika plukta chiluk bidrachav bederechu zohu domelakan or bederech zu ena domelakan. So we'll say, for example, derech means in certain ways this is similar, in certain ways this is dissimilar. We'll see, for example, we're going to see, let's say in our Mishnah, there are three ways. Well, actually, we don't have three. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara. So let's see. Dekanami diktani. Dekanami diktani. Sefer Rabbi Elazar Omer Esrog Shavaleila Lechol Davar Shmamina. Rabbi, you can see this distinction, by the way, in the Esra case, because Rabbi Elazar argues, and he says Esrog Shavaleila Lechol Davar. An estrog is like a tree in every way. So what do you see from here? Whenever there's no distinction, ultimately, again, we use davar. When there is a distinction, for example, as according to Tanakama, an estrog is like a fruit tree, in 3 ways, and like a vegetable in 1 way. So that's why I use lashon of derech. It's like this, so there's a distinction. So again, when there's a distinction, we use derech. Where there is no distinction, ultimately, again, we use davar. I'll just point out something very interesting. Once you have this, by the way, Rashi explains, so why do we use derech over here in the Mishnah? So we're going to see in just a moment that the Mishnah says a woman is acquired, you're able to affect Kiddushin with 3 things, right? Kesef, shtar, and bia. We're going to see one thing you can't affect Kiddushin with is chuppah. Chuppah. So there's a distinction again in the mechanisms of marriage. 3 items will affect Kiddushin. One thing which does play a role in marriage cannot affect Kiddushin. That's the use of the lashon of derech. So I will say, so again, a fascinating situation. I will point out, just kind of looping back full circle, we'll say, if you remember again, when the Gemara introduced this concept, if you remember again, the first time the Gemara uses the lashon of the first example the Gemara you brought of derech was v'hodatem lohemes haderech yelchu ba. Remember, you will teach them the derech they will walk on. Derech was used in Torah. So I will say it's interesting. So the way that the Torah describes itself is lashon of derech, not a lashon of davar. Not a lashon of davar. Why is that? Now it makes perfect sense. I will say, what's derech? Derech is used when you're trying to make a distinction between things. Now let's say, what is the entire essence of our Torah Kedosha? What is our entire essence of Torah? Lahavdil ben atar ben atameh, right? Ben amoter v'ha'aser, right? Ben atar ben atar. The whole essence of Torah is distinction, because the whole essence of Kedusha is distinction. To be able to know what to do, what not to do, what to embrace, what to avoid, what I should run after, what I should run from. And that's why Torah Kedosha itself is referred to as derech. The entire avoda of Torah, we'll say, is to teach us how to distinguish, how to make choices, how to do right, how to take what's good and how to leave aside that which is spiritually harmful. Just a fascinating way to kind of close the discussion. Good. Well, let's go weiter. So remember again, let's go back to Mishnah. We're still tethered in this Mishnah. So remember again, the Mishnah said, Aisha niknis b'shlosha drachim. A woman is acquired through his nabose. We know from our extensive journeys in Shas, whenever you see a number, so numbers come to do 2 things, which is number 1, include, but number 2, exclude. So what are the numbers of the Mishnah, right? Remember the Mishnah says a woman is acquired in Kiddushin in 3 ways and could acquire herself in 2 ways. So ultimately, what are the numbers coming to include and exclude? So the Gemara says like this, here we go. So minyan duration le'ute chuppah. The minyan, right? So the number of the Mishnah, the number of the Reish at the beginning of the Mishnah is coming to exclude chuppah. Then I will say we'll talk about chuppah, and we're going to talk about exactly what chuppah is and what chuppah does. One thing chuppah doesn't do is Kiddushin. Chuppah does not affect Kiddushin. So we're going to see the sugya of chuppah as a separate sugya. So according to Rav Huna, who says that chuppah does go ahead and affect Kiddushin mikal v'chomer, lemi'utei mai. So according to Rav Huna, who says chuppah does affect Kiddushin, what does the number of the ratio, what is it coming to exclude? Lemi'utei chalipin. Very easy, I will say. It comes to exclude chalipin. As I will say, remember, what is a kinyan chalipin? Kinyan chalipin is, you give, right, I want to give Reuven an object. So what do? Reuven gives me his handkerchief, right? I lift up his handkerchief, and when I lift up his handkerchief and acquire it, he acquires I'm giving him a cow. He acquires the cow. It's a flip active acquisition. So I will say, so chalipin does not work by marriage. It doesn't work by marriage. So I will say, can you imagine again? Right, Rachel walks over to Reuven. She gives him a handkerchief. He lifts up the handkerchief, right? And mazel tov. Now she's right. Chalipin doesn't work by kiddushin. Doesn't work. So the Gemara says, because what would you have thought? We'll say again, so we're not going to get into all the technicalities of a kinyan chalipin, but that's what chalipin means. Like, lachlof is to exchange something, right? So again, objects are exchanged and acquisition occurs. So since we learn out the gzer shav of kicha from stei Ephron, masad the mekanyan bechalipin, af ishanami mekanyan bechalipin, because I can make a kavachomer. I was supposed to say, once I'm learning out kicha from Ephron, yesterday's daf, which taught me that kesef works by Kiddushin, so I would have said that creates a halachic bridge between land acquisition and marriage. And the same way that Chalipin works to acquire a field, maybe Chalipin should work to affect Kiddushin as well. Kamash Malon, it doesn't. But why not? The Gemara says, I don't say that's actually that's a pretty good drasha. That's a pretty good drasha. Kicha Mistei Ephron teaches me that Kesef works by Kiddushin, but it also creates a halachic bridge between land acquisition and marriage. So why not say just like Chalipin works for real estate, it should work for marriage as well? I'll tell you why. Chalipin isnu bepachos mishava pruta, v'isha bepachos mishava pruta. Amadeus lo mekanya nafsha. Both say it's very simple because Chalipin works with less than a shava pruta, right? In other words, the object you use for Chalipin, technically speaking, ultimately again does not have to be a shava pruta. A woman will not commit herself to marriage for less than a shava pruta, or utilizing a utensil that is less than a shava pruta. Very interesting. I will say, there's also, I'm not getting into it now, there's a whole discussion exactly how Kinyan Chalipin works, right? Who is lifting up the object, whose object itself has to be used for the Kinyan. Again, we're not going to get into it now because it's not really so important for our sugya, but Lamaisa, again, what the Gemara is pointing out over here is the minyan dereisha, the fact that the Mishnah uses a number. Three things affect Kiddushin is coming to exclude something. What is coming to exclude? Either chuppah or Kinyan Chalipin, that those are not effective mediums or those are not effective mechanisms for creating Kiddushin. Minyan of the Sefer, let me go to Emai. So also when the Mishnah says at the end, we'll say Gimel Beis, 3b, first line on the top. So also when the Mishnah says at the end that a woman, so to speak, acquires herself through two mechanisms. Remember, what were the two mechanisms, right? Either get or death of the husband. What is that coming to exclude? Lemiuti chalitza. Interesting. It's coming to exclude chalitza. And I will say, now what does this mean? It's coming to exclude chalitza in a non-yibum case. In other words, I will say, Reuben is married to Rachel. And what happens? It's not working out. They decide that they're getting divorced, right? So Lamaisa, what doesn't work to end their marriage, right? So you can imagine, right? Reuben comes home, right? He's had a hard day at work. He comes home, he sits down in the recliner, he turns on the TV. Hence the dissolution of the marriage, right? So now what happens? She goes over and she takes off his shoe. And she says, okay, have a good life, right? That's it. So she just did chalitza, right? So she's done. So you might have thought that Allah Chalamai said this should work. Kamashmala, no, there are only two ways in which a marriage is dissolved, either get or death of the husband, right? So Lamaisa, again, chalitza won't work. Now, why would I think that chalitza would work? Well, it's fascinating. So how did I tell you would have thought as follows. Tisi mekal v'chomer mi yevama. Make a kal v'chomer from yevama. Third line down, I will say, Gimel days. Ma yevama she'ena yotzeis beget yotzeis bechalitza. So it's very interesting. A yevama can't leave her marriage with a get. Right? Remember, I will say, Reuven dies without children. He leaves behind the widow. Right? Rachel does Yibum, or now is a Yevama, ready for Yibum, ultimately again with Shimon. So what happens? So we'll say Shimon, Reuven's brother, gives Rachel a get. Well, so what's the impact of the get? Nothing. Now, remember, we learned in Yevamis that Midrabanan, once the Yavam gives the Yevama a get, they can't do Yibum anymore. But you still need Chalitza. Right? So we'll say, so now watch this. So therefore, again, so giving a Yevama a get is a meaningless act. Ma Yevama she'ena yotze beget, yotze bechalitza, but yet chalitza does work. Zu sheyotza beget, eno din sheyotze bechalitza. So a regular woman who can go out of a marriage with a get, then what? Certainly chalitza should work as well. An interesting kavachomer. Kamash malam, no. Kamash malam. So that's the havamina. That maybe chalitza should work in a regular case as well. Kamash malam, it doesn't. I ve'ema hachanami. So the Gemara says, but you're saying good. So why doesn't that? That's actually a pretty good kavachomer, right? It's actually pretty good. Why isn't that true? Why not say that? Amar Kra, Sefer Krisos, Sefer Koser, Sefer Karsa ve'im davar achar koser. Because we'll say again the pasuk by talking about divorce says Sefer Krisos. It is only a book, only a document that dissolves the marriage, not chalitza. So therefore, I will say what we come out with is, and this is actually a very beautiful methodical Gemara. So we'll say what you just see is we're going just literally through the Mishnah, line after line. So now we're trying to figure out why does the Mishnah give me a number. First of all, I could do basic mathematics, right? So if you tell me Ha'isha Let the Mishnah just say, Ha'isha niknis b'kasef shtar ubiyah. I would say, again, I don't even have to take off my socks. I can see that's 3, right? That's 3, right? So, Lamaisa, why the need for the number? Same thing at the end. Isha kones atzma, she could acquire herself, just say beget ubamisas habal. That's 2. Why do you need numbers? Numbers always come to exclude something. So therefore, the Mishnah says 3, the Mishnah says 2. So 3, by Kiddushin, comes to exclude either chuppah or chalipin, and the 2 ultimately comes to exclude chalitza. That a regular woman, ultimately, again, who's getting divorced, who's ending her marriage, chalitza will not work. Chalitza only works in the case of yibum, but will not work to dissolve a regular marriage. Good. B'kasef. So we'll say, so again, you can affect kiddushin b'kasef. So minalan. Where do we know that from? Now we'll say, you're asking yourself, didn't we do this? Right, we did this already. Kicha mistei afron. So we'll say, what the Gemara wants to do over here is a little bit of a deep dive into kasef. That's what's happening over here. Rashi says, "Bekesef midal." Rashi is in the first short line on top. Hacha ikar. Here is the primary sugya of kesef. Ulael agav grara nakit leilitarutze lashon kinyan demasnisin. Beforehand, it was just a very superficial discussion about kesef, just to justify the lashon of kinyan. Just by lashon of kinyan. Here, Rabbi say, is the actual deep dive into kesef. So here we go. So Minalan, from where do you know that kesef works to affect kiddushin? That's question 1. Besu hadisnana avzakai bito b'kiddusha b'kesef b'shtar b'biyah minalan demekanya b'kesef b'kesef davuahu. But say furthermore, we have a Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? A father is entitled, ultimately again, father has a right to the Kiddushin of his daughter, B'kaseh b'shtar b'biyah. And Rabbi said what that means is like this. A father, this mostly talking about obviously a girl who is still within Naros, either a Ketana or a Nara. See, he has the right ultimately again to betroth her, and therefore as a result, he gets the Kesef Kiddushin. He could receive the Shtar Kiddushin, or he could give her over in marriage to someone. That's biyah. Give her over. So we'll say. So the point we're focusing on over here is if a father marries off his daughter, he gets the Kesef Kiddushin. So the Gemara says, "Minolam de bekanya bekesef, bekesef davuah." So the Gemara says we're going to focus on 2 questions. Question number 1, I'm going to go out of order. Question number 1, actually no, we're going to go in order. Question number 1 is, how do we know that Kesef is an effective mechanism for Kiddushin? That's question 1. And question 2 is, how do we know that the father gets to keep it? Right, so 2 questions we're focusing on. So here we go. It's very simple. It's a pasuk. V'yatsa chinam ein kasef. I will say the pasuk says, "V'yatsa chinam ein kasef." So we'll say, remember again, this is talking about an ama ivriya, a Hebrew maidservant, right? A Jewish girl who is sold as a servant. So what's the halacha? The halacha ultimately again is either the master has to marry her at a certain point, right? Or ultimately again, or free her, or emancipate her. Right? Ultimately again, she goes free in kasef, right? There's no money, which means I will say the master gets no money. Upon reaching maturity, she ultimately again is free, and there's no monetary restitution to the master. So the Gemara says, "Ein kasef la'adon zeh, aval yesh kasef la'adon acher." Now I will say, when it says "ein kasef," it's telling me in this situation there is no money that comes to the master, to the authority figure. But there is another case where kasef does come to the authority figure. Umanihu, and who is that? Av. Telling us the father. I will say now, when would the father get money for his daughter? That would be a situation when he's marrying her off, and ultimately there's Kesef Kiddushin. So the Torah is telling me that who gets to keep the Kesef Kiddushin? The father. So the fact that the Torah goes out of its way to say that in this master-maid-servant relationship, ein kasef, there's no exchange of money, tells us in this situation there's no exchange of money, but in another relationship there is an exchange of money. What's that relationship? Of a father who's marrying off his daughter, he gets to keep her kesef kiddushin. How do you know that? Maybe ultimately again, maybe halacha l'maisa that she gets to keep the money. Right? She gets to keep the money. In other words, maybe the Torah is saying, when an Amma Ivriya goes free, there's no money to the master, but in a different case, so there is an exchange of money, she gets to keep it. So maybe she gets to keep her own Kesef Kiddushin. To which the Gemara says, Hachi hash avia makabel Kiddusha. Now, there's no question that the father gets to keep her Kesef Kiddushin. Why is that? D'chsiv, as biti nasati leish hazeh. V'ihi shakla kaspa. I would say if the father has the right to marry off his daughter, right? In other words, if he has that right to determine who she marries, which is the right that a father has in his non-Bogeres daughter, if he has the right to determine ultimately, again, who she marries, does it make sense that she keeps the money? In other words, if he has that right in her, then it only makes sense that he gets the Kesef Kiddushin as well. Ve'ema, hani mili kitana de les liyad the Kabel Kiddushin, aval naira de is liyad the Kabel Kiddushin, takdish ihi nafsha v'tishkol kaspa. So let's say, so the Gemara says, okay, I'll grant you that there are cases in which a father will get the Kesef Kiddushin. But maybe the only time the father gets the Kesef Kiddushin is when, I will say, when he is marrying off a daughter who's a Kitana. Because we'll say Kitana doesn't have a Yad. She doesn't have the ability to acquire. So in that case, it makes sense. Father has full autonomy, has the ability to marry off the Kitana daughter. She doesn't really have the capacity to acquire, and therefore who gets the money? Who gets the money? Father gets the money. But a Nara, well, so remember again, a Nara is really in halacha already like a quasi-adult. Quasi-adult, one step away from Bagros. A Nara does have the ability to affect her own marriage, does have her own yad for acquisition purposes. Maybe a Nara, remember again, what's a Nara? 12 years old to 12 years old in 6 months, right? It's a very small window. Remember again, Ketana, below 12, Nara, between 12 and 12 years old in 6 months, Bogeres, above 12 years old in 6 months. So Nara is a very narrow window. So maybe Nara, who does have Das, Nara, who does have Yad, maybe she should keep her own Kesef Kiddushin. Amar Kra, Binu Areha Beis Aviha. Both say the pasuk says, Binu Areha, in her Narus, she is in her father's home, which teaches us what? Called Shevach Neurim La'aviha. We'll say any benefit, bless you, any benefit accrued during her Narus comes to her father. So Benu Arua Beis Aviha. So we'll say the Lashon al-Pasuk is when she is in her Narus, she is part of her father's home. She is in Beis Aviha. The Gemara is understanding that to now that any right or any benefit that accrues during her Narus comes to her father. Therefore, that's the raya that the father keeps the Kesef Kiddushin. I ve'elahad amravuna amarav minayin shemasa habas la'av. How do we know ultimately again that a daughter's earnings ultimately again go to the father? Shneimar v'chi yimkar ish esbito la'ama. Because remember, the Torah gives the father a right to sell his daughter as a maidservant. Ma'ama ma'aseyadeh l'rabba. Just like a maidservant, her earnings go to the master. Af basnami ma'aseyadeh la'aviha. Ultimately, again, so too, a daughter, her earnings go to her father. I say for Benuara Beis Aviha, but why are you learning it out from that pasuk, right? Why not learn it out from Benuara Beis Aviha, which teaches us that even through Narus, anything that she does ultimately accrues to the father. Ella b'hafaras nedarim hu dichsiv. You're right. You know what the problem is? That pasuk Benuara Beis Aviha, you know what it's talking about specifically? What is it talking about? Hafaras, annulment of vows. Annulment of vows. It's actually not talking about earnings. That's why when the Torah wants to speak about earnings, it uses the lashon of kiyim kar ish es bita la'ama. Benuara Beis Aviha is actually talking about vows. Hachanami ba'faras nedarimu dichsiv. Therefore, I will say the pasuk over here. So remember, we were just using that pasuk. So remember, we're focusing on two questions. What are our two questions? Question number one. Thank you. Right? How do we know that Kesef works to affect Kiddushin? We're starting all over. Right? How do we know that Kesef works to affect Kiddushin? That's question one. Question two is in the case of a Nara, how do we know that the father gets to keep the money? Those are the two questions. So I will say, so that Kesef works. That Kesef works, ultimately, again, we're going to discuss, right? But Lamaisa, we're focusing now more on the father. So we wanted to suggest that we learn that from the pasuk of Binu Areha Beis Aviha. Now what we just established is that pasuk is actually talking about Hafaras Nedarim and not earnings. So we're a little bit back to the drawing board. So why do we learn out from that pasuk? So why don't you just say the same way that a father has the rights of Hafaras Nedarim over his daughter means he has control. If he has control, maybe he has monetary control also, and therefore Allah Lamaisa, again, he gets to keep her earnings specific, but in this case, he gets the Kesef Kiddushin. No. Mamona mi isura lo yafinan. Ultimately, we'll say we don't learn out monetary law from Isser. Nidarim is Isser. Kesef Kiddushin is going to be monetary law. I, v'chi tema nelef mikinasa. And I will say we're gonna stop over here. Actually, maybe you start from Knas. I will say, what is Knas? Knas is the case. What happens if the daughter is violated? The daughter is violated. So there's a financial penalty. I will say, who gets that financial penalty? Who gets that? The father. So maybe we say, just like the father gets the financial penalty if the daughter is violated, so too again he gets her against Kiddushin. The Gemara says you can't do that either. Why? Mammon miknas lo yafin. I will say you can't learn out mammon, which is monetary law, right? From Knas. So also remember again, Knas in general, penalty payments are a chiddush, right? Knas doesn't have to make sense. Knas is a penalty payment. It's a chiddush. You can't learn out a halacha from a chiddush. So I will say we'll stop over here for today. We're still left with our two the questions, which is number one, what is the source for Kesef? What is the source for Kiddushin? Number two, ultimately, how do we know that our father said? I will say, I just want to mention, New Masechta always brings new opportunities. I will say, part of the greatest challenge in Daf Yomi, greatest challenge besides waking up early is retention. I will say, if you've noticed, by the way, these dapim are ridiculously methodical and well laid out. I want to give a shkoyach to the Shas. Really did a great job laying this out, right? It is, the Gemara flows. I will say, 5 minutes of chazara in the evening on the daf we learned could easily help to solidify. It is, especially these dafim, very sequential steps in this Gemara. Again, we're at new Masechta, new month, Emirat Hashem about to come upon us. Take a few minutes every evening to chazer a little bit, and I will say again, gives us a better opportunity to mamish hold on to this beautiful treasure. Shkoyach. I'm sorry. Oh, tomorrow Rosh Chodesh, Daf Yomi 5:45. So you could say, Moshe is trying to unify the people.